The email hit my inbox at 7:43 a.m. on a Wednesday, and I almost deleted it without reading. I was standing in the lobby of a Marriott in Denver, coffee mug in one hand, leather folder under my arm. Just 12 minutes away from a major client walkthrough at a regional hospital network that had brought me in to trace their disappearing vendor payments. My phone vibrated. The sender was my mother, Renata. The subject line stopped me cold. "Don't come back early. Enjoy starting over." I clicked it open, expecting another one of her usual complaints about the heating bill, the leaky faucet, or the endless list of minor grievances she'd been firing my way ever since I made the mistake of letting her move in with me. Instead, it was 3 short paragraphs, almost casual. She and my sister Danny had made a decision. They had cleared out the entire house, furniture, electronics, jewelry, even the old cedar chest my grandmother had carried from Guadalajara, loaded everything into a moving truck, and driven straight down to Scottsdale, where Danny had lined up a short-term rental. The final line read, "Your savings are already taken care of. You were always better at being alone anyway." I read it once, then again, then a third time, and then I smiled, not out of shock, not out of relief. It was the quiet, knowing smile that comes when something you've spent months quietly preparing for finally happens, and you realize your preparation was more than enough. My name is Margot Delgado. I'm 36 years old. For the last 11 years, I've worked as a healthcare compliance consultant. Hospitals and insurance companies pay me good money to find exactly where their cash vanishes before the loss turns into a public disaster. By training and by nature, I am someone who does not leave important things unprotected. I read contracts the way most people scan restaurant menus. I keep records the way others hold onto grudges, organized by date, time-stamped, and never deleted. Renata and Danny clearly hadn't counted on that. Let me take you back. My father, Ernesto, had passed away 20 months earlier from a sudden pulmonary embolism, the kind of death that gives no warning and leaves no time for goodbyes. He left behind a life insurance policy, a 16-year-old Subaru, and a family that was already quietly unbalanced. Danny is 5 years older than me. She was always the one my mother worried about, rearranged her life around, and rushed back to whenever things fell apart. Danny had dropped out of grad school, piled up debt, bounced between cities, roommates, and jobs with this restless energy my mother liked to call finding herself. I had watched it from the sidelines for years, never quite able to put my finger on why it unsettled me so much. I had put myself through college on full academic scholarships, worked every weekend, graduated debt-free, and built a demanding career that rewarded precision and discipline. My mother's usual reaction to my achievements was a small nod, as if I had simply done what was expected. After my father died, Renata told me she couldn't manage the house on her own. She was 63, in perfect health and perfectly capable of living independently. But grief does strange things to people, and I wasn't immune to mine either. So I invited her to move into the house I had bought in Sacramento when I was 31. Then Danny just needed a few months to get back on her feet. Those few months stretched into 3 years. I paid the utilities, the groceries, the property taxes, and the homeowner's insurance. I drove Renata to every doctor's appointment. I handled every piece of estate paperwork while still traveling 4 or 5 days a month for work. In return, I was treated like a useful appliance, relied upon, but quietly resented. The warning signs appeared one after another. 9 months before Denver, Danny began asking oddly specific questions about my banking setup, slipped casually into normal conversation. Do you use a credit union or a regular bank? Is your savings account the same one you use for bills? I convinced myself she was just trying to organize her own finances. I told myself it was nothing. Then I started noticing mail that had clearly been opened and resealed, the flap slightly crooked, the edge pressed back down in a way that was almost unnoticeable. 1 letter, then 2. I blamed the humidity. Next, Renata began hovering in doorways whenever I sat down to pay household bills. She never asked questions. She just stood there, her eyes drifting toward my laptop screen. The moment everything clicked into focus came on a Thursday evening in April. I returned home early from a 2-day client trip and found Danny sitting at the desk in my home office, her back to the door, studying a printed bank statement I had tossed in the recycling bin. She folded the paper quickly when she heard me. "Just using the desk," she said. Her face wasn't embarrassed. It was annoyed at being interrupted. I didn't say a word. I walked to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed with my hands perfectly still in my lap. I didn't feel panic. I felt the sharp, icy clarity that arrives when something you've been quietly filing under, probably nothing, suddenly reveals itself as very real. That same night, I called my attorney, Philip Weston. Philip is 51, a former banking litigator who now runs a private practice focused on asset protection and civil disputes. He has a calm, steady presence that makes even chaotic situations feel manageable. When I described what I had seen, he was silent for a moment. Then he asked, "How much of your full financial picture do they actually have?" "Probably too much," I replied. "Then we start today," he said. "Not later." That conversation marked the beginning of 5 months of quiet, methodical preparation. Philip brought in a forensic accountant named Clara Ibanez, who had 15 years of experience tracing hidden assets and building fraud cases. Within a week, she delivered a 12-page report detailing unauthorized activity stretching back 8 months, small. Irregular withdrawals from an account Renata had limited access to for household expenses. I immediately moved the majority of my savings out of the account they knew about. What remained in the visible account was a carefully structured balance designed to create an undeniable paper trail if anyone tried to touch it, the kind that crosses state lines and triggers federal wire fraud statutes. I photographed every valuable item in the house: serial numbers, purchase receipts, insurance appraisals. Several pieces I suspected Danny had been researching were quietly swapped with insured replicas after Clara confirmed the appraisal searches in the browsing history on the household tablet Danny used daily, thinking no one was watching. That tablet was being watched. I upgraded the home security system to a private cloud backup they knew nothing about, with full audio and video coverage of the main areas. I removed Renata from the household expense account and replaced her access with a restricted debit card capped at $200, with instant alerts sent to my phone. Then I waited. The Denver consulting trip had been scheduled for early November. I told Renata and Danny 10 days in advance and studied their reactions closely. Danny nodded quickly and left the room. Renata asked what day I was leaving. Both responses felt just slightly off, the kind of off you can only spot after months of careful observation. I left on a Monday. By Wednesday morning, while I was deep into reviewing vendor contract discrepancies on the 4th floor of a hospital admin building, the email arrived. I stood in that Marriott lobby and took 40 slow breaths. My hands were cold. Something tight at the back of my throat wanted to escape, but I refused to let it happen in a hotel lobby. Then I forwarded the email to Philip. I called my bank's senior fraud specialist, Adrian Cole, a contact Philip had set up 6 months earlier specifically for this scenario. And I opened my laptop to check the security footage. The moving truck had arrived at 8:40 a.m. The 14-minute video showed my house being emptied room by room, the dining table, the framed photos, the cedar chest. Even the old record player my father and I had restored together when I was 19. At one point, Danny's voice came through clearly on the audio. "Take everything that has value first. Leave the books." I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked straight into my next meeting. I am a professional. They were not going to take that from me, too. By that evening, Philip had already filed emergency reports with Sacramento PD's Property Crimes Division, the bank's fraud unit, and the appropriate federal channels. The movement of property across state lines, combined with the attempted transfer from the flagged account, triggered federal jurisdiction. Philip also reached out to the Scottsdale Rental Management Office. Renata had accidentally forwarded their confirmation email to a shared family account I still had access to. The property manager cooperated immediately. He wanted no part of a fraud investigation. Within 2 hours, Adrian Cole confirmed the account Renata had tried to access was frozen. The transfer she thought had gone through was sitting in a review queue. Every single digit carried a traceable trail. I flew home the next morning. The house was completely stripped. I opened the front door at 11:17 a.m. and stood in the empty entryway, letting the silence wash over me. No rugs, no console table. No photograph of my father and me at my graduate pinning ceremony that had hung in that hallway for 4 years. The hooks where our coats used to hang side by side were bare. The air smelled of packing tape and the particular emptiness of everything that once made the space feel like home. I put on latex gloves. Philip had instructed me to treat the house like a potential crime scene. I photographed every room, every empty bracket, every drawer left slightly askew. Renata had left a note on the kitchen floor next to the open safe. She had taken the $800 in emergency cash I had deliberately left there, along with some decoy documents. She hadn't checked under the bottom shelf. Taped there was a small index card in my handwriting that read, "Check the account names again." I photographed it exactly as I found it, then slipped it into my bag. I poured myself a glass of water, the only thing they hadn't taken that I needed right then, and I waited. Danny called first at 6:58 p.m. I let it ring. Renata called at 7:40, then again at 7:43. On the fourth try, I picked up. She didn't bother with hello. Renata hadn't said hello to me in years. Her voice was high and strained. "What did you do? The card isn't working. The transfer is frozen. The rental office is asking about payment." I leaned against the bare kitchen counter. Outside the window, a neighbor's sprinkler hissed steadily. "Help with what?" I asked calmly. "The accounts," she snapped. "What accounts?" I replied. Danny snatched the phone. I could hear traffic and wind in the background. "Stop playing games. Whatever you reported, undo it. We're here now and this is your fault." "I didn't take anything," I said. "You took my property," she hissed. "You emptied my house. And your mother sent me a written description of exactly what happened," I answered. "With that subject line. That email was between family," Renata shouted from the background. I wrote that line down immediately after hanging up. Philip laughed for a solid 10 seconds when I read it to him later. She had sent a detailed written confession of felony theft to my professional email address and actually believed it was a private family matter. What followed was not dramatic courtroom scenes. Real cases are built on spreadsheets, scheduled conference calls, and documents with numbered exhibits. My neighbor Greta Sandoval had seen the moving truck that morning and recorded a 42-second video on her phone, Danny clearly visible in the doorway, her voice perfectly audible. Detective Lorraine Castillo from Sacramento's Property Crimes Unit reviewed the security footage, Greta's clip, Renata's email, and Clara's financial report in one focused 3-hour meeting. When she finished, she looked at me and said, "You did half our job for us." "It's what I do for a living," I replied. She almost smiled. The civil settlement was reached 4 months later. Renata's attorney pushed for it to avoid trial. It included structured repayment of the misappropriated funds, return or replacement value for everything taken, and a formal acknowledgement that the removal had been unauthorized. Danny's separate restitution agreement came with a probation structure that would trigger criminal charges if violated. Between the insurance claim, recovered funds, and restitution payments, I recovered approximately 89% of what had been taken. Real life always leaves some scars. I rebuilt the house exactly the way I had always wanted it. I bought a new dining table by myself on a quiet Saturday morning. I repainted the back rooms. I turned Danny's old bedroom into a proper office for my consulting work, standing desk, dual monitors, the right chair. Within 60 days, I was running 3 new client contracts out of that space. The room that had once held 3 years of someone else's chaos and my own unpaid patience had become the place where I was finally building my future. That was my favorite part. I won't pretend otherwise. Renata called one last time, about 7 weeks after the settlement. She wanted to know if there was any chance of rebuilding a relationship. I thought about her question for a long moment. I thought about 11 years of being the one who paid, who worked, who showed up, who managed everything while traveling constantly. I thought about the calculator, the resealed mail, and the way she used to stand in doorways watching me pay bills. I thought about that email and her voice on the phone claiming she had only wanted Danny to have a real life, as if my life was something she had the right to redirect. "I don't know," I said finally. "Not right now." She hung up first. Here is the only thing I will say plainly. I did not set a trap. That's the story people tell when they get caught. What I actually did was notice the warning signs, document everything carefully, and protect myself from a threat that had been growing in my own home for nearly a year. What Renata and Danny called a trap was simply the natural consequence of taking something that wasn't theirs from someone who keeps meticulous records. That is not cruelty. That is accounting. People who steal from family count on one key assumption: that love will stop you from protecting what's yours. That you'll be too hurt, too guilty, or too afraid of being labeled cold to do what needs to be done. I had spent 36 years being taught that lesson. I finally decided it was one I no longer needed to learn. So if someone in your life is making you feel that protecting yourself is somehow a betrayal of them, maybe it's time to start keeping better records.